Awesome. Well, I'm going to get our presentation started. As I mentioned before, I'm Osho Hawthorne, serve with Frontier Ventures, and are helping to lead this Bitcoin 4 missions project. So it might be a surprising topic for you, or maybe if you've done some research, you might think it makes total sense. But hopefully by the end of this 40-minute presentation, it'll at least spark some of your imagination. So let's begin with an outline of where we're going. So first, we're going to look at the problem that Bitcoin was built to solve. Then we're going to look at what is Bitcoin, just try to define it, help you understand it. We'll look at why and how Bitcoin is solving the problem in the global south. And then finally, we're going to look at unlocking the potential and exploring the possibilities for missions. And we'll talk about our specific project that we're working on. So let's start with that first question. What's the problem that Bitcoin was built to solve? So Bitcoin was founded by an anonymous person that went by the name of Satoshi Nakamoto. Satoshi disappeared 2 years into the development of the project, so we'll never really be able to ask him or her or whoever they were why they created Bitcoin. However, Satoshi Nakamoto did leave us some clues. So the white paper, which described the project, you could say was nailed to the wall of a web forum on Reformation Day 2008. And then it was launched in January 2009. And the first ledger entry of the Bitcoin blockchain, which is just a list of transactions and ledgers every 10 minutes, there was like an Easter egg, a little note in that first ledger. And it was from the London Times front page that day, which said, "Chancellor on the brink of second bailout for banks." So it was in the context of the great financial crisis and the many bailouts of 2008 and 2009 that Bitcoin was created. And many who have studied its origins believe that Bitcoin was created to solve the problem that is inherent in government fiat currency. Now, if you haven't heard that word before, fiat means simply to declare by decree, in the same way that God creates through his word. So fiat currency is money created by the declaration of a government, and it's not backed by any commodity such as silver or gold. It's just the government says so, and therefore it is. Now, let's talk about what are some of those broken incentives that that Bitcoin may solve, right? So here is George Washington saying, paper money has had the effect in your state that it will ever have, to ruin commerce, oppress the honest, and open the door to every species of fraud and injustice. And he's talking about paper money, fiat, in contrast to a gold-backed currency. And then you have, of course, John Maynard Keynes, who is the father of the modern economic system. And he said this, he says, I should support all sorts of policies for increasing the propensity to consume. And so our economic system from the ground up is actually built on a false understanding of the Imago Dei. It's built on understanding that people are primarily consumers. But if you read the first chapters of Genesis, you know that no, we're called to be producers, right? And cultivators and ultimately stewards of God's creation. And so you have broken incentives, and broken incentives lead to a broken behavior. And so the incentive to consume creates people that want just momentary pleasure, and they don't have a long-term thinking. And so, of course, that's what we see in our culture. Next, in this broken system, there's this issue of monetary debasement. Here's a little chart of the dollar's worth. And honestly, inflation leads to this consumption mindset, because you don't want to save, you don't want to live frugally and invest in the next generation. You got to spend as quick as possible because your dollar is losing value. And so in 1913, you could buy 30 Hershey's bars for $1. Now you can't even buy a small McDonald's coffee. We looked it up, and It's $1.17 for a small coffee at McDonald's. Just some brown water, basically. So the dollar has lost 97% of its value in 100 years. And it just kind of quick economics lessons. Governments, right? When they need to raise money to fight a war or do their operations, they have three choices. They can increase taxes, they can decrease spending, or they can print more money and inflate the currency. Now, it's a lot harder to raise taxes and cut expenses. And so inflation and money printing is basically that hidden tool that governments use to expand. And it's slow and gradual. It's kind of like cooking the frog slowly. Here's another just almost kind of hilarious example of monetary debasement. So here's the Golden Gate Bridge, built in 1937 for a cost, and this is inflation adjusted, of $700 million in today's dollars. And it only took 4 years. It came in under budget and under schedule. Now, here is the net under the Golden Gate Bridge. Now, it is a whole nother commentary on our culture on why you need a net on a bridge. But it was built in 2023. It cost $400 million, and it took 6 years to complete, and the ultimate cost was 5x the original budget. That's some net if it costs just barely under the cost of the actual bridge. It's be funny if it wasn't so sad. And then one last point about this fiat currency is, of course, there's government corruption, and these are just political cartoons from the 2008 financial crisis. And you see the banks getting bailed out while the people suffer under foreclosures. You have the corporate welfare office in line with all these different big industries lining up to get money from the U.S. Treasury. So, but that kind of begs the question. These are all very U.S.-centric issues, which we all know because if you're from the U.S., you're familiar with these things. But what about, how does this issue of fiat currency affect the global South? Here's a quote from Alex Gladstein, who works with the Human Rights Foundation. He says this. He says, only 13% of our planet's population is born into the dollar, euro, Japanese yen, British pound, Australian dollar, Canadian dollar, or Swiss franc. The other 87% are born into autocracy or considerably less trustworthy currencies. 4.3 billion people live under authoritarianism, and 1.2 billion people live under double or triple digit inflation. So let's look at some of those inflation numbers. Just look at the difference between the blue and the red toned countries in this chart on the left. Unless you live in the blue, you are suffering from pretty high inflation. And then the list on the right just compares that the 20 countries with the worst inflation average over 42%. And then compare that to the G20 nations that only have a 4.2% in inflation. And in the missions world, right, we would look at these lists and see that there's many unreached peoples that also line up to being in these countries with some of the most broken financial systems. Just a few more points about the global South and economics. Here's the issue of limited financial freedom. So the Heritage Foundation has an economic freedom index to look at things like rule of law, government size, regulatory efficiency, and open markets. And if you don't live in the green spaces, you are dealing with a lack of financial freedom, a lack of free and open markets, where Bitcoin's fully open and uncensorable network offers value because you don't have freedom, largely because of government or largely government corruption. You also have this issue of limited financial services. So where are the unbanked? Here's a map of this from the World Bank. So you have 1.7 billion people in the world who are unbanked. And in the United States, we just take for granted the ability to safely store and send value anywhere and to access capital markets to invest our excess money. And it's simply not an option for 1.7 billion people that don't have banks. But now here's a little kind of the glimmer of hope, at least as we talk about digital currencies, is that there's still over a billion people that don't have a bank but have internet access, and so could access digital currencies like Bitcoin. Now, I'm gonna go to one last chart in this topic, but before I go there, I'm gonna ask you a question just to think about it. The question is, do you think more money flows from the global north and the west into the global south through things like development and charity and all that? Or do you think globally it's vice versa? More money flows out of the global south into the west? Just think about that for a moment. I wonder how you view the relationship between those two things. I used to think that because of charity, right, of course, the West is flooding resources into the developing world. But it's actually not true. Alex Gladstein just published a new book on this, an extensive research project into the neo-colonial abuses of the IMF and the World Bank. And these are just two charts here where you see the significance of this issue. Right, so on the left you have net resource transfers from developing countries out, and you see the dollar amount. It's about $2 trillion leave the developing world and go into the West, or about, I think it's about 8% of their GDP. And then on the right you see the debt of developing nations as a percentage of their GDP, and the debt is just increasing. And you wonder, okay, well, who holds those debts? Well, they're paying money to the IMF and the World Bank, to the Western economies, and it really is a neo-colonialism that continues today. So it's easy to think, right? It's just, oh, the developing world has these challenges because of corruption in their governments and bad resources and any number of kind of thoughts we might have, but a lot of it comes from the brokenness in the Western system of how we take advantage of this. So now this is this brief summary of the state of global economics. It's not really very pretty. And it's this global reality that Bitcoin was created to fix. Now, that might sound like a totally crazy claim. How could a small open source software project started by an anonymous founder on some random web forum, how could that make a dent in the global challenges that we've talked about? Okay, so to answer that question, it's essential to understand the underlying technological innovation of Bitcoin. And let's look at that now. So what is Bitcoin anyway? I'm gonna play a short video from a Senate hearing in 2018 about that.
Chairman Crapo, Ranking Member Brown, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Peter Van Valkenburg, and I'm the Director of Research at Coin Center, an independent nonprofit focused on the public policy issues affecting cryptocurrency and public blockchain networks. What is Bitcoin? Bitcoin is the world's first cryptocurrency, and it works because of the world's first public blockchain network. What does Bitcoin do? It's simple. It lets you send and receive value to and from anyone in the world using nothing more than a computer and an internet connection. Now, why is it revolutionary? Because unlike every other tool for sending money over the internet, it works without the need to trust a middleman. The lack of any corporation in between means that Bitcoin is the world's first public digital payments infrastructure. And by public, I simply mean available to all and not owned by any single entity. Now, we have public infrastructure for information, for websites, for email. It's called the internet. But the only public payments infrastructure that we have is cash, as in paper money, and it only works in face-to-face transactions. Before Bitcoin, if you wanted to pay someone remotely over the phone or the internet, then you could not use public infrastructure. you would rely on a private bank to open their books and add a ledger entry that debits you and credits the person you're paying. And if you both don't use the same bank, well, then there'll be multiple banks and multiple ledger entries in between. With Bitcoin, the ledger is the public blockchain, and anyone can add an entry to that ledger, transferring their Bitcoins to someone else. And anyone, regardless of their nationality, race, religion, gender, sex, or creditworthiness, can for absolutely no cost create a Bitcoin address in order to receive payments digitally. Bitcoin is the world's first globally accessible public money. Is it perfect? No. Neither was email when it was invented in 1972. Bitcoin's not the best money on every margin. It's not yet accepted everywhere. It's not used often to quote prices, and it's not always a stable store of value. But it is working, and the mere fact that it works without trusted intermediaries is amazing. It's a computer science breakthrough, and it will be as significant for freedom, prosperity, and human flourishing as the birth of the internet.
Okay, let's just look at a brief visualization of what the video was describing. And so here you have the worldwide decentralized peer-to-peer network, which is Bitcoin, and it's made up of 4 primary components. Here you have miners on the left that create Bitcoins by using computers to solve mathematical functions. The same process verifies those transactions. Then you have Bitcoin exchanges, and they trade conventional currencies for Bitcoin, offering a way in and out of the market for non-miners. It's also important to mention that in the global south, it's often peer-to-peer networks. You don't need an exchange to exchange Bitcoin for currencies. You can just do it with a person. Then you have the individuals and businesses. They create wallets that allow them to send and receive Bitcoin. And then finally on the right is the cryptography that secures the network, ensuring that all balances and transactions are safe. Now, I want us to look at one statement from the video. He ends with these words: Bitcoin will be as significant for freedom, prosperity, and human flourishing as the birth of the internet. Now, that's quite the claim, isn't it? But I would argue, and really, I don't know each of your stories of and what brought you to this webinar, but for most of us, I would say that after 14 years since Bitcoin was invented, you probably still don't know much about it, nor its effects on the world. And in many ways, Bitcoin is like the internet in 1998, right? You're carrying on your life as normal, and you have not yet been affected by it. But the claim that Peter Van Valkenburg made in 2018 is that in the future, Bitcoin's adoption will be as vast and as world-shaping as that of the internet today. Okay, again, that's quite the claim. But if you map Bitcoin's adoption along the same lines as the internet, you can start to see this. There's a number of charts and different ways that you can visualize this. But here you have in the Y chart, percent of the world's population, so not the Y chart, the Y axis, and then the X axis, years from inception. And here you see that Bitcoin and the internet is on the same exponential growth curve. And I would argue that the reason they share the same adoption curve is because they are both open networks that leverage what is called Metcalfe's law. And if you're not familiar with it, Metcalfe's law basically states that the value of a network grows exponentially with each additional participant, right? So with 2 nodes, right, there's just one connection. And then when you have 5, then there's that many more connections. And then as it grows, it's an exponential value that grows within a network as each participant joins and creates that many new connections. Now, here's one other chart just to show the exponential growth of Bitcoin. And so in this chart, you see the gray jagged line is the USD value of Bitcoin. And whenever you chart the value, you have to do it in a log chart because of its rapid growth. You can look at the left. Log means, right, 0, 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000. You have to graph it like that because of the growth. So for the last 14 years, Bitcoin has competed on its own merits against other currencies, and gradually more and more people and even nations are choosing it over established government fiat currency. So it's increased in value against the US dollar, which, by the way, is the best performing currency in the world. If you compare it to any number of other currencies, it's going to perform significantly better. But against the US dollar, it's increased an average of 153.8% a year. And its total return is on the millions of percent. So just kind of taking it all the way back, if you happen to be a very early adopter, like literally, if you bought Bitcoin on the first day it was publicly traded on the internet, which was in 2010, you could have bought 125,000 Bitcoin for $1. And if you held that much Bitcoin today, if you held on to it, you would have $3.25 billion today, turning $1 into $3.25 billion with a B, in 14 years. Now, other element of this chart, if you look at the colors on the chart, that is the value settled on the network. So when one wallet sends value to another wallet, right, that is settled. If you're running a business, you might settle your books every month. Well, the Bitcoin network settles every 10 minutes. And the blue bar is the most relevant one as we look at this chart. And it shows that $4.2 trillion of value have been settled on the Bitcoin network since its founding. And you see it's increased most recently. In fact, in 2021 alone, Bitcoin settled $13.1 trillion in value, and it beat the Visa network for the first time in value settled. So that's just a picture of its exponential growth and why I don't think it's a wild claim that it will disrupt the global financial system. So the next question I want us to look at is why and how Bitcoin is solving the problem of broken financial systems in the global south. There's one thing to say it's going to compete against those systems, but I'm actually arguing that it's a part of the solution that we need. And so we talked about the problem, but now I'm going to get into some examples of actual use cases. But before that, I want us to look at the why it's able to solve problems in the broken financial system in the first place. And I would say that Bitcoin solves the moral hazards of governments and banks controlling the money supply, because its monetary policy is not based on the whims of politicians or central bankers, but is hard-coded into its software, okay? And you don't have to know anything about the technology of Bitcoin or understand cryptography and hashing and all this stuff and mining. You don't have to understand any of that to appreciate its monetary policy that's engineered into its code. So what is that? Is Bitcoin's monetary policy? In summary, it's these things. First, it's a supply-capped and energy-backed currency with a predictable and ever-decreasing inflation rate. So far, about 19.5 million Bitcoins have been created out of a total supply of 21 million. The remaining Bitcoins will be mined over the next 100 years or 150 years or so. And this mining is based on proof of work, or what we would biblically call sowing and reaping. If you want to, quote, print Bitcoins, you need to expend energy. You can't just turn on a money printer. Second, Bitcoin is a global, open, and permissionless network accessible to anyone with internet access. It's inherently egalitarian and is not a respecter of persons, or as we would say biblically, it promotes justice and equity and shows no partiality. Next, it enables cryptographically secured property rights and payment rails that make government and corporate seizure and censorship impossible. Or, as we would say biblically, it's governed through truth and law and not power and politics. Now, it's because of its monetary policy and supply issuance because it's hard coded into the protocol, there can be no bailouts. There's no government debt. There's no on-demand money printing. It's a store of value currency like gold with its limited supply and predictable issuance. And at the same time, it has the speed, programmability, and encryption of a digital dollar designed for the internet. Some people will argue, well, we need to get back to the gold standard. Well, we live in the 21st century. It's just not going to work. But if you had a digital gold, that has a value proposition. So its monetary policy is why it has the potential, I would argue, to solve the problem of broken and corrupted financial systems. But is this happening anywhere in the world, or is this just wishful thinking of Bitcoin early adopters? Well, let's look at some examples of how it's actually being used for human flourishing globally. And we did a lot of research through this process, and these are actual true stories and things that we've learned as we did our empathy work. So first, you have refugees fleeing from war and persecution are taking unconfiscatable assets with them. This is just a picture of some Ukrainian refugees after Russia attacked Ukraine, and there are stories of people who rather than storing their money in the bank, had it on a Bitcoin wallet, secured with 12 words that they memorized or they had written down somewhere. And when the attack happened, rather than needing to rush to an ATM and finding a long line and then the ATM's already missing, or that the banks had closed, people with Bitcoin could just get in their car and leave and bring their wealth with them without having to access it through a bank or ask permission from anyone. Next, you have women in repressive communities who are engaging in commerce outside of the systems that exclude them. So this woman here is Mahbub. She's Afghani, and she used Bitcoin to pay women who she was teaching computer programming and building internet businesses in Afghanistan, in a very patriarchal system where women don't have access to work and money. She was able to entirely bypass the economic systems that excluded her and empower women to make money, to build businesses and build wealth. And this is happening all around the world. Next, we have persecuted minorities are protecting their assets and engaging in commerce with privacy and censorship resistance. So if you look at this little sticker here on the left, it might be hard to read, but it says Bitcoin can't be racist. It's not a respecter of persons. And so a government can say, hey, we don't like Christians, and we're not going to give them access to money. I was just talking to a dear friend who's from a Christian tribe in North India, and they're currently being persecuted and killed by the Indian government and by other people groups there, and their churches are being burned, and it's hard to get them funds, and it's hard for them to have access to their money because the government has decided that they're not. They shouldn't have access to it. We heard recently about the Canadian truckers, and they were debanked because they did things that the government did not like. But you might not have realized that where GoFundMe failed, there was a group of Bitcoiners that raised a bunch of Bitcoin and got them in the hands of truckers. And they didn't have to ask the government permission. They didn't need to use the banking resources, and it couldn't be stopped. So that's just one illustration. Another way this is happening is diaspora people are sending funds to their homelands without needing permission or paying excessive fees. This is a picture of a family in El Salvador. And this is one of the reasons that El Salvador adopted Bitcoin as legal tender, is because as a country in Central America, their primary economy and their import is remittances from the West and from North America. And if you're unbanked in El Salvador and your family in the US is sending you money, you have to travel maybe all day to get to the Western Union. You're paying significant fees. You're taking cash out of the Western Union and hoping you don't get robbed on the way home. There's just it's a very just like archaic way to transfer value. And now with Bitcoin, they literally can just send over the internet value to a wallet in any country, and that person has value. And in El Salvador, it's very easy to convert to US dollar or even spend as Bitcoin. We have just a couple more here. We have unbanked people have access to secure asset custody and instant payments. These are two different Bitcoin mission projects, one in Guatemala, another one in Peru, where unbanked people are getting access to custody and payments. They also have some neat ways to hold stable coins that are pegged to the US dollar and transferred back and forth between that and Bitcoin. You have people living under extreme inflation are storing value in an asset with a limited supply cap that preserves their wealth. Here you have Zimbabwe, the starving billionaires. And on the left is a picture from Lebanon. We have a missionary contact in Lebanon. That's an American missionary, but he can't spend his US dollars in Lebanon because the banking system's entirely broken. He can't get US dollars in any efficient way. And so he actually gets his salary in Bitcoin, and he stores it in Bitcoin. And then on a weekly basis, he goes to the money changer, sells his Bitcoin to get lira to go buy groceries and pay rent. But he stores his value in Bitcoin and not in lira because of the inflation. And then finally, there are off-grid and isolated rural communities are being electrified and connected to the internet through Bitcoin mining. This is Eric Hirschman, who we mentioned earlier, who runs a company called Gridless in East Africa, and they are using Bitcoin mining to fund the capital expenditures and build out of microgrid renewable energy for off-grid African communities. Now, there's a lot of details there that we could talk more about, but just kind of in summary, Bitcoin mining is being used to bring power and internet access to off-grid communities in a way that no other technology could accomplish that because of the market incentives that align for them to do this. Now, that's the you could say the base case that we are making for our project and why Bitcoin leads to global flourishing. Now I'm going to ask a couple of my coworkers to come on in the last few minutes that we have to talk about our specific project, Bitcoin for missions. So first, if Nate, you want to talk about our innovation grant and what our project is.
Yeah, thanks, Ashwa. We we received one of the innovation grants this past year from our proposal to hold 3 different trips where we were going to go to different locations in the world where Bitcoin has already had an impact, where something is happening on the ground that we can observe and look at and learn from. And so what we're planning on doing, the first of these 3 trips will be in November in El Salvador. And we'll be going there to observe the Bitcoin beach phenomena that where a circular economy was created by a missionary there, starting to distribute Bitcoin and getting some businesses online, and they started to lift the community out of poverty because of the circular economy that they were creating. So that, by the way, led to El Salvador as a nation accepting Bitcoin as legal tender, which was, they were the first country to do that. It's probably a big thing in the news you may have heard about. But it all started with a missionary endeavor with a guy trying to help a community. So we're going to go there and we're going to talk to the people who were there when it started and learn from that. We're going to gather a group of people. These are going to be Christian entrepreneurs, some indigenous missionaries from other parts of South America and Latin America, Central America, and we're going to get some technical software developers together, and we're all going to, so a lot of different stakeholders, and we're going to go and observe what's happening, and then we're going to actually hold a design sprint, which is a discernment practice where we can kind of go through some ideas about how we can build prototypes, and then we'll send the workers that came back to their locations in the field to test out the prototypes that we build, to try and reproduce new ideas in other places, get new projects off the ground. So the other two places that we're going to be going are Kenya in the late winter, probably the beginning of next year, and the other one will be in Lebanon in late spring. So we're going to be doing similar activities in those. There's some different focuses based on the different location, the different activities that are happening in those locations. But yeah, we're looking forward to seeing what we can get started.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing, Nate. Now, for this grant, the primary outcomes are 3 to 5 prototypes launched by these missionaries that we're coaching and consulting with and raising up. But even through this process, we've already seen so many different possibilities that we can pursue. And so there's several prototypes that we're already looking at. Now I'm going to ask my colleague Tim Vickers to come on and share about some of those prototypes.
Hi guys. Yeah, thanks for the active chat. I'm enjoying connecting with you guys there. These are some. We've got nowhere near an exhaustive list, but we've been just learning from other practitioners on the ground as to what they're doing, how they're thinking about this technology. So one of the ways that we're seeing is this is a prototype we're working on, would be a global accessible fundraising that taps into new donor communities. There was actually a case study I sent to my colleagues last night of a nonprofit wanting to rebuild a bridge in Lebanon, and they told the story, put it out there, and then within minutes they had raised several $1,000s to go ahead and reconstruct that bridge. It was final and settled in their account. We've got several friends we're working with in that region, and it takes up to a month sometimes to receive funds. So that was a really cool little case study we discovered. The other one we're thinking about are new strategies for sending missions funding into creative access contexts. There's been some really good questions thinking through how do you off-ramp into the local currency. That's definitely one of the difficulties. In a lot of these high inflationary environments, like the chart that Ash showed earlier, a lot of the communities are wanting to maintain some of their savings in Bitcoin. They're starting to actually be able to transact with each other in it, so they don't have to convert. Some of the more rural areas that are farther out, that's not the case yet. And so, but we are seeing some development in that. So that's one of the prototypes that we're researching. This one's more on the US Western side, but there are nonprofits are even thinking about a Bitcoin allocation for a diversified endowment portfolio, especially with the changing economic environment. Some are concerned with 40% of our US money supply being created in the last couple of years. And there's been a lot of study now showing adding even just a small amount of Bitcoin to a portfolio can improve the diversification of that, called the Sharpe's curve, if you're familiar with that phrase. Another one we're looking at is community economic development tools and education for unbanked and also financially repressed communities. We've been doing some empathy studies in Central America. Several of the communities we've been in or have teams that are in, they've shared their phrases like, "Oh, I would never have a bank account." And when you dig in on that idea, it's because it's inherently not trusted. There's corruption. I've worked in some regions in the world where they've deleted the zeros on the currency, or they've changed my project's bank balance just overnight. And so there's some really great educational tools about this technology now, especially in Spanish, actually. Another one, the next one is, which Ash alluded to with Eric's project in East Africa, providing electrification grid stability. So we've got renewable energy, economic development, and then also business as mission among impoverished communities using Bitcoin mining. And that's, anybody wants to talk about that, we've got a lot of resources that we're learning about, but the basic understanding for that model is finding a cheap source of energy. and which are typically the cheap sources of energy in like rural Africa or places that are difficult to get to. It's really challenging to transmit that energy. And so there's some solutions with this technology around the Bitcoin mining. And then the last one, I'm really interested in this. I've invited several of you guys on the call today. There is a whole suite of open source software tools that are around this Bitcoin protocol. And so we think of Bitcoin a lot of the times, it's just money. But there's encryption that is available as well, that you can attach files or data that you can point to. So it could be gospel resources. And then there's also now another protocol that's built in tandem that actually allows you to have a peer-to-peer messaging. Think of your own private peer-to-peer signal chat. So for teams that are going into hostile areas, I'm very interested in what's happening in the world of the unengaged, unreached right now. These tools can be used to have peer-to-peer messaging and then also resource access, which I think is really exciting and interesting for the furthering of the gospel.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tim and Nate, for sharing. And now we've come to our questions and discussion time. I haven't had a chance to look at the chat, but I know my other coworkers have. So if any of you want to bring questions up either through the chat or I don't know if folks will want to come up and ask them personally. But let's talk.
Yeah, I was going to throw this one to you, Ash, and maybe we can chat a bit. We've had some good questions centered around what happens if you don't have internet access, or Alex asked, is governmental or private control of internet access able to impact the Bitcoin network or Bitcoin transactions? Thought maybe you want to share some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question. So something unique about Bitcoin versus like modern day internet and Web 2, Web 3 is the bandwidth requirements are so small. So Bitcoin is specifically made to be highly decentralized and to be, you could just say, slow and boring. So people talk about all these other cryptocurrencies and how great they are and they're faster, these other things. Well, Bitcoin, its goal is to be secure and decentralized and like survive like nuclear holocaust. And so because of that, the actual bandwidth required to use it is just very small. So in Africa, there's actually companies that use SMS to purchase and send Bitcoin. There's also, I mean, with Musk's satellite network and there's just, I would say it is true you need the internet, but if we're talking about internet technologies in general, and that's the world we're entering into, it's the most rugged kind of like low bandwidth type of internet requirement that's needed. And then the only other thing I would say is there are smaller networks, a group called FEDI that's creating federated like community-based economies, and they allow for offline exchange of value that then at a later time you can update with the network, and then everything settles. So it's possible to do it offline and then go online and settle. Is there anything, Nate or Tim, you would add to that?
Yeah, if you want to go ahead and stop screen sharing, that might be easier for us to see. Yeah, I put something similar to that in the chat. There's SMS protocol now that's backing into that. It's growing quickly. We're seeing more and more of these sort of shakedowns as governments try to shut off the internet. And then we had a few listeners comment about how Starlink turned internet on in a few different places. We saw that in Iran. We've seen it in Ukraine, then switching it back off. And so, yeah, I think that's it's being worked on. You still at this point do need some sort of internet eventually. So, but we think that now is the time to explore these opportunities for missions. So, Nate, what was one question you'd like to throw out?
Yeah, I liked Ernie's question about the software that's behind Bitcoin, is it susceptible to hacking? And I did reply, but I think you guys probably would have some good takes on that as well.
Yeah. So my quick answer would be that there's a 14-year and running multi-billion-dollar bounty on hacking the Bitcoin network, and it's the Satoshi wallet. So this founder that began mining Bitcoin when no one else was using it mined a whole lot of them. In fact, almost a million Bitcoins are sitting in his wallet, and it's a public ledger, so anyone can pull it up and you can see the wallet address, when it was mined, and what Bitcoins are there, and you can see that they've never been moved. And so if someone could hack into a Bitcoin wallet, they would be one of the wealthiest people in the world right now. And no one's done it. So that's the hacking into a wallet. The other question is can you take down the network? Could there be even a state-sponsored attack? And the only way to do that is to control 51% of the global hash rate, or do 51% of the mining that's going on in the world. Well, right now, so the Bitcoin network is the largest, you could say, supercomputer network in the world. The amount of computer energy put into securing the network is greater than any other network in the world, and they're very specific algorithms to solve a certain type of SHA-256 encryption, right? They're machines made to solve one type of math problem. And so even if you took Microsoft's entire Azure network and AWS's entire Amazon network and pointed them at the Bitcoin network and say, try to hack the network, it would fail. Now, it would have been a different answer 10 years ago, but it's kind of been a Trojan horse, and so that ship has sailed. It's now
the largest computer network in the world. Bitcoin network is. So yeah, that's great. I think just so you guys are aware, we've put all of our emails in the chat. You'll get our emails at the end. We would love, for us, we're viewing this as the start of a conversation. We don't have it all figured out. We're compelled with the idea of how could we use this new technology, for the glory of the Lord. We don't have all the answers, but I think there's a good question here from John. He says, what do you see as actionable next steps that would create additional momentum? And then the second piece of this is, how does one become an ambassador of something like this moving forward in regions where it has yet to be adopted? Anybody want to take a stab at that? I'll go first. I think, John, you and I can talk tomorrow, but we are hosting these in-person design labs. We have really feel the Lord's opened doors with several of the technical experts that have been building on this technology. We want to expose more mission practitioners to some of the ins and outs, what's available, what are the options. And then our goal, using the Missionexus Innovation Fund, over the next 9 months, we want to build prototypes. Typically, when you're building a prototype, 10 to 20% of them will be viable for some sort of solution for scale. So I think from a next step from the mission side, that's what we're aiming for. Big picture, I would say, just if this is interesting to you, just keep reading and learning about it. We're actually creating a resource base now that we hope to have ready soon that will be these types of topics focused on human flourishing. So you can kind of learn about it from that angle. And maybe that might be of benefit to those that are interested in learning more.
Yeah, I'd also say if you're going to be at the leadership conference end of this month, we'll have a discussion table on this topic. And I know myself and Nate will be there, so you can come find us either at that table or we'll be around.
Okay, let me rapid fire a couple more questions that have come in quickly here. We have, historically, missions funding has been funded by biblically conservative churches. How do you help conservative thinking people to be fiscally forward thinking with low risk tolerant people? Ash, you have a lot of experience with that. You want to take a quick answer?
So, I mean, some of the challenge here is just mainstream media, right? And there's kind of a meme, a little bit of a joke of a chart, and it shows the Bitcoin chart going up and down, but always like up and to the right. And it's the media guide. And when it's up, it's Bitcoin's a bubble. And then when it's down, it's Bitcoin is dead. And then those are the only two like headlines that the mainstream media will use for it. Now that is changing. If you're in that world and you watch the investment TV and you read Forbes and all that stuff, that narrative's changing. But I would say it's helping folks be willing to do their own research and move out of just kind of mainstream media type of headlines. And I think this whole argument of sound money, like I was just listening to this class taught by R.C. Sproul Jr. on like biblical economics, and he's just like essentially arguing for like hard currency and limited government and a lot of these values that tend to be more conservative, and about limiting government and all that. It's all there's a lot of alignment, I would say, when you get below the surface of, oh, it's for scammers and hackers and drug dealers. Hopefully that's helpful.
That's good. Yeah, let's keep rapid firing, then Ed, we may circle back to yours. That could be a longer answer, but here's a great one. What elements are still lacking to purchase bananas off the street quotes in some countries? That's a good brass tacks question. Nate, what do you think about that?
Yeah, it is an issue about the off ramps for Bitcoin. Unless you have like in El Salvador, they have that circular economy where the store owners have agreed to accept Bitcoin and people are working for Bitcoin and they're exchanging it among themselves. That's where you can go buy the papusa at the market. In other places, you have to find off ramps or who's going to be the exchange. It's not likely. There are some countries that have banks that will set up a transfer from your wallet to the bank, and then you can move it to your bank. But in other places, you're going to have the money changers on the street that are the ones that normally trade dollars for the local currency, and some of those are also not, they're able to trade Bitcoin. And those are, for us to be able to point people to this city in this country, it's hard for us to do because we don't have the relationships on the ground yet, but we're starting to build out some kind of databases or kind of trying to get the list of the places in different locations where what the off ramps are in those locations, so we can help to direct people that way.
Yeah, and I would just add that several of the different projects globally that are working on this are just creating circular economies, and basically they just onboard merchants, show them the value proposition that it provides, and then there's a bit of a kind of a virtuous cycle as you onboard merchants. There's on ramps, off ramps, then people just start to use it. They see the value of it, and then it grows.
Okay, let's go. We've got a few more minutes here and we can dig in on a couple of these, but this builds off of the sort of a conservative investment question. Bitcoin has at least somewhat of a reputation as an exchange for criminals and nefarious purposes. This to Brian's question, how do you overcoat that image among conservative mission sending, overcome that to evangelical sending churches?
You want to try?
I can jump in.
Yeah,
I can jump in. I mean, I guess the way that I would phrase it, I've been researching a lot and tracking this. It's a tool. That's how I would phrase it. So just as much as we have an iPhone, or if I give you $100 bill, if I put $100 bill in your hand today, is your first question going to be, wow, this $100 bill, this could really be used for evil. I'm not sure what I should do with this $100 bill. And that's kind of how I would phrase it, is there are nefarious purposes for a lot of things in our lives, and the Lord can also use an iPhone to communicate the gospel into closed countries. So yes, I also have a friend who's a forensic accountant, and she will tell you she greatly enjoys it when criminals use Bitcoin because it's open and transparent, and they usually don't do a very good job of obfuscating what they're doing, and you can kind of track that. And so there are layers being built on top of this computer network now that will make it a bit more anonymous. And I think that's why our topic is, we're saying we're exploring the possibilities and trying to wrestle with this, that how do we deal with some of these things? So I would say that's kind of my initial take, is it's a tool, and that's what we're aiming for. We're not advocating that anybody run out and buy a ton of Bitcoin and try and conflate that with the gospel. We want to keep the main thing, which is the gospel going forward, people encountering the love of Christ, being transformed by him. So that's kind of how I would probably address that. Anything you guys want to add?
I would say, if anything, the church ought to be attempting to be on the front end, capturing the use for the kingdom before it can be used for more evil. Does that make sense? I mean, let's not abandon things that have that are neutral. Oh, it could be used for evil, so let's abandon it. Instead, why don't we think about, let's be front runners for once, and actually put it to better use before it can be, turned bad.
Okay, Ed has got a final question for us, but before we hit that, let's hit his original one up here. He just said, could you just talk a little bit more about the mining process? So Ash, do you want to give just a high level, maybe 60 seconds? Mining, it's kind of a weird word. What does that actually mean in actuality?
Yeah, I mean, mining is a metaphor, right? They're really just computers designed to solve math problems and try to essentially guess a number. And I made this point a little earlier in my presentation about proof of work, or biblically we would use the language of sowing and reaping. Bitcoin is the first network. So there's a number of inventions and innovations that went into it. One of them is digital scarcity. How, like, I went to college in the days of Napster and like you could download your MP3s, right? And copy and paste digital files. So how do you create a digital ownership that you can't copy and paste? So that's one thing that Bitcoin invented, digital scarcity. But then the other question is, how do you create something in the digital world that can only be created by doing something in the physical world? And it's essentially a physical world, digital world connection that cannot be broken. And Bitcoin, one of its primary innovations is that in order to secure the network and create new Bitcoins, you need to exert energy. And so that's the connection to the physical world. You actually have to have energy and spend it on the network in order to access the Bitcoin from the network. And so that's what grounds it, you could say, in reality and truth and physics. There's no cheating the system, because if you want to win the Bitcoin that's a part of securing the network, you have to invest the resources into it. And so the mining is essentially the method for incentivizing market actors to secure the network. So if you're willing to spend energy to secure the network, you will be rewarded with the new Bitcoin that are created every 10 minutes. And it's a market incentive that secures it and has caused, there's a number of publicly traded miners. It's globally the largest computer network in the world that's incentivized those people to plug in and secure the network.
Yeah, I think that's great. If you want more info on that, reach out to us. We can share. That's a pretty exciting breakthrough that's happening. That's why one of our design labs will be in East Africa. We think it has great potential for creative access, and this technology needs cheap access to energy. There's a lot of wasted energy in the world. You think about oil wells that are just burning flares up into the air. You think about landfills that have trapped methane. There's just a lot of, we've got a missionary friend in Central America that helped his community do a waste treatment facility where they are capturing the methane, and they're using that, pushing it into a generator and then using it for Bitcoin and creating a bond structure that then is going back and investing into the community through schools and road infrastructure, water infrastructure. So if what I just said sounds absolutely insane and you're interested, just reach out to us. We would love to maybe share with you Eric's talk at the event we were in May. Last question, Ed had a really good one here. He says, how does one get started? What would be some natural next steps? Ash, think of that in terms of Bitcoin as a whole. For us, we would love for you guys to be praying for us and reach out. We have a concept paper. You're going to receive our design lab handout for November. We are actively wanting to chat with mission practitioners that want to join us on this journey. So I think that would be a next step in terms of the three of us and our community and project. We'd love to get to know you and wrestle through some of these things together. But in terms of Bitcoin as a whole, Ash, how would you kind of answer that? What would be a good next step? I know Nate put a good resource book in here in the chat.
So I'll share a couple of things. Maybe Nate or Tim, if you want to, I think the Swans resource page, if you want to try to find that link, I think that could be a good one. So there's a lot of education resources out there. There's also a lot of like scams and other things to avoid. And so, I mean, I would encourage people that want to explore the overlap in missions or want to think through it for themselves to educate yourself and to invest resources, whether it's financial resources or time and energy into exploring possibilities related to global impact in proportion to your education, right? Some people get over their over their skis and jump in and do foolish things and lose their money or get into something that they don't understand. And so we're not encouraging anyone to though we're making some big claims, hey, we think it's going to make a difference in the world. For individual, we would say just take this. If it is going to be so significant, you can't ignore it, right? And the advantage, like Nate shared, about being on the front side of it is to God's glory and would provide fruit, I believe, in the kingdom on the front side of this global adoption. And so it would just be education and then play with the technology. I mean, you can use the Lightning Network and download an open source wallet. And in fact, if someone does that, we could send you some a little bit of Bitcoin, or you just play with the technology and explore it in small little ways, and not just with a custodian like a Coinbase, where it's the same banking model, but actually use the open source software, actually download a wallet, actually send it to a friend, receive it, play with it. That's what I would encourage.
Yeah, I'm going to put some more resources in the chat if you guys want to look at that before we end. And then otherwise, I think we can hand it back over to Ed.